and welcome to Still Standing. I'm Shannon, I'm your host, and today I am interviewing Ann Claire Kronlage. She is an electrocution survivor and the author of a book called More Than Skin Deep. I heard Ann's story on my favorite podcast, This Is Actually Happening, and as I was listening to her story of survival and overcoming, she used some language that indicated to me that she had some spiritual understanding. So I reached out to her and wanted to thank her for sharing her story. But through our conversation, she revealed that years after her accident, she was in hypnotherapy and discovered that she had had a near-death experience. So when we were talking about which podcast to have her on, either Magic is Real, which is my podcast about afterlife, metaphysical, and spiritual topics and near death experiences, or if I should have her on this podcast. Anne had shared with me that after having died, after having flatlined, at the time she didn't remember anything about it, but later in life, she went through this hypnotherapy session and then had a memory of her soul leaving her body and coming back in. Well, as we were talking about it on this podcast, it sort of was revealed that there really wasn't much to delve into there. So what was supposed to be a podcast interview for Magic is Real is now switching over to Still Standing. So there are going to be some sort of spiritual topics within that may be your thing, that may not be. But just to explain sort of the way that this all evolved, now you can kind of see that we did end up focusing more on the aspect of her survival and her overcoming and what she learned, but there is mention of a near-death experience in there. So again, I never want to, that may not be your thing. You may not have a belief around that, but uh, just take it however it resonates. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. And without further ado, because that was a lot of ado, please welcome Ann Claire Kronlage to Still Standing. I'd love to start by asking you to share about your background before your accident, what your life was like, perhaps what your spiritual beliefs may have been or not been, and tell me anything that you are comfortable sharing about what your life looked like.
I was the third born in a family, a very Catholic family. Eventually, I had six younger siblings that were born into the family, but my older brother passed away when he was 4 from leukemia, which I see as the turning point in the family life, the environment, because my parents, as everyone did at that time in the 60s, they didn't process their grief. They lived with tremendous grief, and my father became a rageaholic as a result, and that was the theme of the upbringing. And it was I just took on my father's rage. I think the older I got, from the 2.5 years old when my brother passed, or 3 years old when my brother passed, to the age of 17 when the incident happened. Although I have to start when I was 14, it was expected that we all went to Catholic high school, but I was the only one who did not go to Catholic high school. And that was also a setup for me meeting friends who would bring me to this site where I stepped out of an electrified car. A high power line had fallen on my car, and I stepped out of the car and was, as you said, flatlined immediately. The heart fibrillates and it stops beating. And it was just after Easter Sunday, which is very interesting to me, because my brother, the one who had died on Good Friday, which was, there's a big Easter theme there, an electrical theme, because my father was an electrical engineer. And, it was just a pivotal point in my life that brought me unexpected relief, honestly. And I can look back and realize it was all meant to be, and it was my soul's destiny to experience that.
So basically, you're raised Catholic, right? And so, did you actually personally believe what you about in God and Jesus and all of the
Yes,
things that you learned in church? You did,
yes. I
right?
would imagine I could talk to God. Give me a symbol, give me a sign of something that I can know is true. I remember doing that kind of thing before being injured,
Right,
and had a lot of faith in the rituals of the church, and I thought they were all very beautiful. And I love the saints, the stories of the saints, and my confirmation. Anybody who's a Catholic knows confirmation is a ceremony that you go through, and you get to pick your saint that you want to use as your namesake, I guess.
yeah,
And I picked Bernadette, who was the long-suffering saint, and it seemed like such a noble thing, to suffer and to be without sin because you suffered. And my mother actually said, when I was in the hospital, she said, offer up your pain, because that's the Catholic mentality, is offer it up. And it's the way to use suffering for good.
right. So let's go
Yes.
to the day that you had your accident. Um, yeah, what was happening in your life at that time? How did you end up? I know that you were at a party, and yeah, you can just tell the story from there. And of course, I will preface this by saying that at the time, you did not remember anything spiritual, and that's okay. This story is kind of twofold. There is this story that I sort of wavered between. Do I have her on my podcast? That's still standing. That's about people overcoming challenges, or do I have her on Magic is Real? And what I've determined is, and there's no pressure, considering that the spiritual aspect of it isn't as great. However, it is there, and so I think it's great to hear about that as well. But I would love to. Yeah, let's start with the day when this accident happened.
Yeah, it was Holy Saturday. It was the day before Easter. And I arranged with my four girlfriends to go out to a movie, and then go to the last minute. One of the friends said, hey, there's a party over at this friend's house where the mother is out of town, and we have the basement all to ourselves. With It was all boys besides us four or five of us. Yeah, so it was boys that I hadn't even known. I just knew them from track. I did track, and I was a cheerleader and a gymnastics person. I mean, I don't know that I was especially talented, but I love the activity of it all, and the socialness of it all, and the exercise and the movement. It was, yeah, I've always loved dance, and that's what cheerleading was really for me, was dance. It was wonderful. I love the feel of my body in motion. And I got to use the car because I traded with my mother. I said, hey, I'll wax the floor, the kitchen floor, which was all this parquet wood. I love yeah, I kind of enjoyed that. I don't know if you've seen Karate Kid, where it's wax on, wax off.
Hmm.
It's that real kind of Zen kind of stuff that yeah. Um, so we went to this party that was downstairs at this boy's townhouse. I guess it was a small house, and we were kind of clumsy. We just sat around, and I drank a little bit of beer, but at that time I didn't even really like beer. I was the designated driver, so I didn't have an interest in that. So it became important, because later on, the lawsuit that happened, they wanted to know that I was acting reasonably, and I was definitely acting reasonably as a person in this situation. And when it was time to go home, I brought all my friends. Everybody got in the car, and one of the boys said, hey, can I come with you, and you can just drop me off on your way back? And I said, sure, let's do that. And it was fun. We had a good time, and we were happy, because when you're 17, that's kind of fun, just to drive around. And he was actually one of my friends. She got so drunk that I brought her to another place where she would have been in the car with me had she not been so drunk, which worked out for her. So I ended up dropping all the girlfriends off, and then the boy, I brought him back to the same place where the party was. And in backing out of the driveway, I bumped a utility pole that was 6 inches from the edge of the driveway, and it was due to be repaired. It was very much in my destiny to experience this, it seems, because I mean, yeah. And then I hit the pole and with the back of my car, and the wire fell down. They described it. I don't have memory of the wire falling down, although I was very much awake, and my friend who witnessed me stepping out of the car was yelling, "Don't get out of the car!" And like I said, I don't remember, and stepped out of the car with my hand on the car and my left foot out of the car. And at that point, you become a human jumper cable, which is what this PSA was, and how I used that as a label for my this is actually happening podcast episode, because that's literally what happens. That's the true meaning of electrocution, where some people say, I've noticed in over the years, it seemed to be the trend for them to say, oh, I was electrocuted, meaning they just got a little shock. They don't
Mhm.
really, the true meaning of electrocution is it stops your heart, and it does profound damage, as I have shown in my pictures that I shared on Instagram. So, and I don't even remember anything until I woke up in the ambulance and didn't even realize I was in an ambulance. I thought, okay, what's that? Why are we? I was in the back of a car. I knew that, but I didn't realize it was an ambulance because, I didn't have a memory of anything. Which at first I realized that must have been the way it should be, is that I shouldn't remember. I didn't need to remember. And I always heard people describing their near death experience having all these vivid memories, and I thought, okay, I guess it wasn't meant for me to remember.
Well,
And
what
then,
happened? Yeah, what happened? You get out of the car. I assume, did you step on the wire? How did it make contact with your body? Was it
no, the wire
dangling or was
was
it
on the
on the
back of it.
ground?
It was like one of these, it was on this long station wagon. So, back in the 70s,
Right.
that's what I drove. And so the wire was on the back of the car. I didn't actually contact the wire. And this is a high power line, 7,200 volts,
Wow.
but it's alternating current. So I understand that the actual current changes. And my father, the electrical engineer, said it's the amperage that really does damage to your body.
Right. So when you got out of the
So,
car, how did it make contact with your body?
well, what it does is it falls on the metal, and the metal conducts electricity.
Gotcha. So if your body makes contact with the car itself, it's conducting electricity. Now, is it
Right.
correct?
And so
Okay.
I put a link for a PSA video from an energy company that is on Instagram that shows that too, that this person in the PSA, he just contacts it with his car, but in contacting the car, the electricity flows through you. And
Right.
then the boy that was with me that I brought back, he actually came back out of the house that he went into, and I was on the ground, face planted. Basically, it threw me out or backwards and then forwards, and I face planted on the ground. But my right foot was still up on the threshold of the car, and so I was still. He said there was steam coming off your back. You were still cooking, literally cooking,
Wow.
and he tried to grab me to pull me off, and force of the electricity threw him 10 feet in a
That
backwards direction.
that's what I was going to ask.
And
How did he get out of the car safely, but you didn't?
no, he was already out of the car
Oh, right.
before I backed out.
When
Yeah.
you were backing out. I understand.
So
Okay.
I dropped him off, and then I started to back out. And that's
Gotcha.
when yeah.
From his point of view, what was happening? I know that you were unconscious, but what do you remember feeling anything at that
No, not
time or
unconscious, dead.
Right.
dead.
Yeah, you had no conscious you had no consciousness at all. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, from his perspective, what did he witness?
He said he saw me step out of the car and realized that they were all four of them right there at the scene were Eagle Scouts who had all been told in training for CPR, do not touch somebody who has contacted that kind of thing. You know, you're going to get yourself shocked as well. And three of them, beside, he was the only one that stood there with me, but three of them ran around and said, okay, let's get a wooden ladder so we can move her off of the car because they didn't want to touch me because they were remembering you shouldn't do that because you're going to get electrocuted as well. But the truth is, I've learned this since I had grounded the electricity, so it really wouldn't have killed them because once you ground the electricity, that's why you have GFIs, if you know about GFIs,
Mm-mm.
GF, GFCIs, like the three prong on your outlets.
Yeah.
That third prong is a GFI
Oh, okay.
and it prevents that from happening. And I don't know if it was in place in the 70s, but I've understood that from I was learning about electricity, and so once it's grounded, it's not going to do the kind of damage that it did to my body. But
Right.
I personally grounded the electricity with my body, and so that
Right.
was
Okay.
the important thing that caused the problem for me. Yeah.
Right. So your friend, I assume, was the one who called for help
Well, they could
or who
see that something was going on. There's four of them were in the. I mean, it's a small house with a driveway, and the power line falling down caused the electricity to flash on and off. And a neighbor across the street, he lost power completely. The people all the way down the block lost power. Everybody lost power because the circuit was broken.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that apparently doesn't happen anymore because they've fixed electrical lines that so that they just shut off. They
Right.
don't injure people, because I think
And how
yeah.
when the rescue crew, I assume, got there, how were they able to get you into an ambulance if these power
Okay,
lines are so, active?
so yeah, the first time he tried to pull me off, he was thrown, and then he said he got up again. Second time, he said he was able to take me off because the electricity didn't throw him back the second time. And so they pulled me off, and then they treated me for shock, and they started CPR. And the other
Okay.
boy was inside calling, the ambulance and my parents. And
Got it. Okay. So from what you remember, at least of now, and we'll get to the going to therapy later, but for just in the moment,
yes,
where did you, I'm assuming I think I remember you woke up in a hospital, and how, if so,
well,
how,
the
yeah.
first memory awake was in the ambulance on the way
Okay.
to the hospital. Yeah, and
And
apparently I
what,
was brought to one hospital, and they stabilized me, and they brought me to a second hospital because it had an ICU burn unit. There wasn't
mm.
one close by, but they wanted to stabilize me at that local hospital, and then I was brought to one about a half hour away.
And what do you remember about your first waking moment?
That I was in a dark. It was after midnight, so everything was dark, and I could feel that I was in some kind of vehicle, and but extremely. I mean, to just whisper took all the energy I had. I felt completely exhausted, the most tired I've ever felt, and swollen. It felt very like I was swollen, and there was a woman because I could tell her voice was telling me you're so brave, and she was rubbing my forehead and gently
Yeah.
saying you're so brave. And then I said to her, can you have the driver slow down because I'm getting sick every time you turn the corner. He was going really I assume it was a man, driving so fast that I was feeling like I'm going to throw up if you keep going around the corner fast. And so she told the driver to slow down, and the driver did, which I thought was amazing. Like,
Yeah.
wow, okay. I
Do you
mean, I was a
remember
teenager. I wasn't used to ordering
to
adults
people
around, right?
listening to you? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
had was there any pain yet, or were you still in shock?
No, no
Yeah.
pain. And everyone was un they're they don't believe me when I say there was no pain, but I've read stories of people that have been profoundly injured, like this young man who was driving in his tank over a IED, is that what you call it? Those
Mhm.
bombs, those
Yeah.
landmines, and he blew 3 of his limbs off, and he didn't feel any pain either. And I think
Yeah.
I tell people, the body doesn't need to feel pain in that situation
It
because the
gives you
point of pain
adrenaline.
is, oh yeah, maybe that's it too. Because, but what I say to the eighth graders, I used to talk to eighth graders about my incident. I said, well, think about it. Your body doesn't need it. It needs pain in order to stop you from doing what you're doing. But I didn't need to stop. I
Oh,
was
that's interesting. Yeah, it
knocked
protects you.
out. I was totally immobile. There was no way I was going anywhere.
Right.
So I
And
think maybe it's conserving energy too, right?
yeah,
Because yeah, you're completely exhausted of yeah
I've heard that too from
everything.
so many people that when it happens, you're first of all, you go into shock, and then, your body
Yeah, I was
produces
in shock.
adrenaline, and, that's why then yeah, you don't necessarily feel it until after. I just listened to the latest episode of This Is Actually Happening where a man was attacked by a shark, and
Yes,
the
yes,
shark
he said
bit
the
his
same.
leg. Yeah, and he's like,
Yeah,
"I didn't feel anything," and so that's why
yeah,
people were like, "You gotta stop moving because 'cause you're spreading the blood," and he's like, just he doesn't have that awareness, which is good to, I think, sort of hopefully comforting, although I know that there was pain for you after this, so it's not exactly a walk in the park. But once you're finally at the hospital where they're treating you, and I know you're in the burn unit and all of that, what was the extent of your injuries?
the injuries, the way they described it, 40% third-degree burns, full thickness burns, and amputation 10 inches on the left leg, and most of my toes on the right foot were amputated. Well, they were just burned from being up on the threshold of the car. But the surgeon was like, "Yeah, we saved your big toe," and I thought,
What's
but you cut off the rest
the
of it."
rest of them? So might as well just cut off the whole thing.
No, but I realize now it was integral to
Yeah.
keep your big toe because it makes balance so much
Balance, yeah.
easier. Yeah. The big toe is attached all the way up your leg. It's the only toe that's really attached all the way up. And so it's real important to have a big toe. But
Yeah,
it was interesting at the time. I was like, "You're excited about that? I don't understand." But this is a
right.
surgeon, he's used to all kinds
Sure.
of craziness. And then my left hand, this is where I touched the handle of the car, which was metal, and I was wearing a metal watch,
Oh,
and this
boy.
left hand almost was amputated as well.
Well, it looks like a hand. I mean, except for the
Oh,
scar, it looks
yeah, and
intact.
I've been, yeah,
Yeah,
it had a lot of numbness. I had a couple of surgeries because the nerve endings were severed, tendons
right.
were severed. It was, like I said, it was almost amputated, but my mother was right there next to me as I'm in the morphine coma, massaging it and praying over my hand. And I really think she saved my hand from being amputated because
Yeah,
she was determined it's not going to happen. It can't happen. And I'm forever grateful to her. She's up in heaven now. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I remember that you talked about, I mean, that recovery from burns like that, it's a long process. And
Yeah.
it's, from what I understand, excruciatingly painful. So I know that there was a lot of suffering involved. Um,
Yes.
and I, I don't ask you that because I need you to, necessarily rehash those memories. It's just that how long were you in the hospital and having to deal with those dressing changes and the skin grafts and all of the things that you went through or the surgeries? What was over what period of time were you healing?
Yeah. It was about 5 weeks of just twice a day skin changing. But in the meantime, they also had to debride because on the site of the burns, not everything burns away nice and clean. So they have to take tweezers and pinch, and they call it debriding. And I talked about that in the
You did.
episode where debriding was done. I only remember really a big session of it one time, and that's when I really let I just let myself holler, is how I call it, holler,
Yeah.
and it felt really good. And it was in the middle of hollering, it was fascinating because the nurses said, "Are you in pain?" And I said, "Actually, no. While I'm screaming, I'm not in pain." It
It was a
was
release though, right? I
interesting.
think you described it as sort of a release. I mean, obviously this happened so many years ago and there's been a lot of growth and trials and tribulations and you've written this book called More Than Skin Deep and we can talk I want to talk a little bit about that as well, but again, your near death experience may not look like everybody else's and that's okay. When did you start to do hypnotherapy and why? Was it hypnotherapy? Am I getting this right? Just make sure
Right,
I'm
and it was
yeah,
just one session of hypnotherapy. It was,
right.
I have to say, 17 years after the accident, I don't even want to call it an
I
accident. I
know.
was telling people it wasn't, on my soul level, it was an intentional, like, oh, nothing, yeah, wasn't meant to happen or something. I don't know. But 17 years after the incident, I was driving my children to Colorado to move there. And I had a real strong feeling I need to write now. It's time to write.
Mhm.
Whereas before, I wanted to just push the memories away, push it away because isn't that what everybody does? That's what
Yeah.
you do, right? I mean, that's a natural inclination is just to say, I want to forget about it. That's how we get over it. But the scars all over my body would not let me do that. I was always reminded, in the summertime when it was hot and I would wear short sleeves, for instance, people would, oh my God, what happened to you? That was
Mhm.
always the question. And I always kind of didn't like summer for that reason. But I came to embrace it after writing came as a result of me feeling like I got so much stuff in my head to figure out what am I going to. So writing takes it out of my head and puts it there so I can keep it on record in this form of a book. It was very organic. So I moved to Colorado, and about three years after that, I get into a group of this group of people that were interested in all kinds of things. This one friend that I made, she said, I'm a hypnotherapist. And I mentioned to her, I've always wondered if I really had a near death experience because I don't have any memory of it. What do you think? Could you give me a hypnotherapy session? She's like, yeah, heck yeah. And I went to her living room actually, and I was very lucid through the whole thing. But I was hesitant at first, I have to say, to do a hypnotherapy session about it because what if my heart stops again, when I'm under hypnosis? And she goes, oh, don't worry about that. And I trusted her completely. So I went for it. And she took me to the point where I stepped out of the car, and stepping out of the car just brought my body up to the clouds. They were gray clouds, smoky clouds. And the first pulling was from behind. It was a pulling up and to the clouds, and I floated and I was on an air current, and I'm talking to her as I'm experiencing it in hypnotherapy and saying, wow, I thought this would be a very violent death,
Mhm.
electrocution. No, it wasn't at all. It was quite peaceful, and I was floating, and then there was a sensation I was turned like a pancake where I was brought back down to earth and pulled from behind as well the same way. And that's exactly what my body did. My rescuers,
Yeah.
they pulled me off face down and then they turned me over to treat me for shock and then CPR. And I think that's kind of interesting. But they said when I woke up, I was having convulsions and foaming at the mouth. That's how they knew I was awake or alive, and which is a good thing. But I don't remember any of that either.
Right. When you did the hypnosis, you had the memory of actually sort of leaving your body peacefully while your body was going through
Yeah.
this traumatic experience. And it was a feeling of getting out of your body and then being put back into your body. So was it part of why you said that you know that this happened to you for a reason? And I'd love to hear more about that. Did that revelation come after the hypnotherapy, or was that just something you've always had this innate knowing about from a spiritual perspective?
I didn't really have a sense of that until I would say 25 years later, 30 years later, when I worked at a school when I first moved to Colorado, and I worked at a school for a long time, and I would tell science teachers because I thought they'd be interested to know I was electrocuted and I survived, and wouldn't that be fun to talk to the kids? And most of them
Yeah.
are like, ah, I don't want to talk. No. The teachers were frightened as can be, but I would substitute teach and talk to these kids, and they loved it. They were just like fifth graders, especially. They were sixth graders. Oh my God, tell us more, tell us more. And it was interesting. And finally, I met an eighth grade teacher he was all for it. Yeah, come and talk to the class because we're studying electricity. So that would be awesome. And so it felt very safe for me to discuss it, whereas I was, not comfortable otherwise. But so I talked to the eighth graders, and after I explained what happened, they asked questions, and one of them several times, I've over the several years I would talk to eighth graders. Um, the question was, why did you step out? Why didn't you pull the car forward? Because there was that space on the driveway to pull it forward. Just pull it forward. Why didn't I do that? And that bugged me for a long time. Like, oh, that's a very good question. And I came into this idea, okay, so let's suppose my I chose that. I chose to step out. Why would I do that? And I realized, okay, well, I had all kinds of payoffs over the years. I realized more good stuff happened to me than bad because I was in turmoil. I was not really clear about what I was. What was it? It was. I didn't feel like I had control of my own life. I didn't understand anything, and being in the hospital made me realize no one understands anything, and I have to find it within me. So it gave me all kinds of awareness and witnessing of magic in my life. I was in a situation where there was 4 Eagle Scouts who knew CPR, for instance. That was not a very prevalent thing in the 70s, is when this happened in 1976. People didn't know CPR. They didn't even call it CPR at the time, actually. I mean, right there, the fact that I stepped out of an electrified car that to 4 young men who were one of them who was brave enough to pull me off the car and then give me CPR.
You've had this experience which hasn't always been easy, and obviously there was a lot of pain involved, but also having to live with now you've got, what is it, half a leg? Like
Well,
part of
it's
your foot.
10 inches, so it's like
Right.
below, they call amputations either below the knee or above the knee. So
Okay.
I was lucky to have it below the knee because
Yeah.
if you still have a real knee, it's really a lot different than if you don't have a real knee.
You can bend, I would assume.
I've talked to amputees without a knee, and just getting the insurance company to approve a
Oh,
knee is like, you don't have control. You don't have, yeah, you can't use
right.
your knee joint is very important in walking.
Right.
Otherwise, it looks like you're dragging your leg if you don't have a knee. But
Yeah, you have to relearn how to do things in a different way, and that's not easy. And I would love to hear more about that because I think sometimes we take, think there's the expression of things aren't happening to us, they're happening for us. And at the time,
yeah,
it may seem like, well, how unfair. You're this 17-year-old kid, you got your whole life ahead of you, and you still do. But it's at the time it must feel like, why is this
sure.
happening to me? But then I think later we can, if we do hold that belief of our soul chose this, and it's hard for a lot of people to swallow that. But when you
Yeah,
look
yeah.
back at what's happened since then, what would you say, why do you think your soul did choose this? And what do you think your soul's sort of mission was or purpose was?
I was before injury. I was very frustrated with the idea that society was telling me as a young woman, you're not lovable if you're not a certain way on the outside.
Mhm.
I mean, it was all about the outside, and it was like, I want to be a race car driver. I want to be a, a stunt person. And you have these things in your personality. And the best way I could explain it, I read this book called Your Dharma Type, and I had this warrior Dharma that said, I want to get out there and just like, fight the bullies out there in the world. My father was a bully, so I think that's part of what made me aware of that. And I don't know, I've always, yeah, just discovering my interior, which was nothing like what the world said, oh, you should be this way because you're female. And it's like, but I don't want to play that game. And my mother was all about, well, don't you want to attract boyfriends? That's the most important thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Get yourself a husband. And, oh my God, even when I was with a boyfriend, but was breaking up with him, my parents were like, oh, I don't know. You might want to think about that before you get rid of that one because you might not find another one, is basically what they
Right.
said. And people were surprised that I even had a boyfriend with the injuries on the outside of my
Right.
body. But what I realized was connection, romantic connection, sometimes is not about that at all. And it's a
Mm-mm.
beautiful, so I got to witness that. Oh yeah, that's what I would say. My most profound love experience was somebody who I would say he had every reason to leave, but and everybody around us was saying, what the hell's going on? Why is he attracted to you? And I'm, because it's a soul connection, really, is what it was.
Yeah.
And so I got to I think that would be the purpose for my having a body that was profoundly injured on the outside, but to witness somebody really connecting with me on a real soul level. Wow, that's so rewarding. That's like, I think the reason I came into this life, the reason I moved to Colorado, because I met my last romantic partner here in
Yeah.
Colorado where I'm at. So that, I mean, that was amazing. I'm like on a high where I like, if I die tomorrow, it's okay because my life is really full. I mean, I've had
That's
children,
beautiful.
grandchildren. They're
Yeah.
important too, but that soul experience of connecting with another person on a, I mean, he didn't see the outside of me. He sees, we connected from the in, and it was just amazing. And he's passed on since, and I went to a medium, as you know how mediums
Hmm.
work, but connected with him through the medium, and it's, yeah, he's going to be around forever.
I love your message about the how much emphasis we put on the exterior. And I relate with this so much because I was now you wouldn't, you're looking at me like, "Oh, I don't know what you mean." And you look to everyone else like everyone else, right? Of course, I'm not seeing you in a bathing suit and all that, but
Well,
when
people
I
always
was
say that, but I'm used to that. Go ahead. Don't worry.
yeah, but it's true. Like, when I was a kid, I had a large birthmark on my face, and that's the first thing everyone noticed about me. Well, when you have something on your face, it's something everyone notices, right? So I shut down because I was so uncomfortable with, like
Oh
you said,
yeah.
everyone's saying, "What happened to you? What's?" And so I actually became selective mute because I didn't want to be seen because it was
Oh,
I had a big brown birthmark on my face, which
I can
to me
relate.
yep, there's this beautiful book that if you haven't read it, I feel like you might have, but if you haven't, immediately. Lucy
Yeah.
Greeley. So Lucy Greeley and Ann Patchett, the writer,
Oh yes,
best
yes, yes. I read that.
yes, oh my gosh. So her book, there are 2 books. One
Well,
Ann Patch
tragically, she dies, right,
I
from
yes.
overdose, right? So,
Yes,
oh,
so Lucy Greeley was Ann Patchett's one of her best friends in her
oh, it
life.
was such a beautiful
It's
story of
such a
friendship.
beautiful story of
Oh my
friendship. I
God.
mean, so you've
Oh my
got
God.
2 books. One is Autobiography of a Face, and Lucy, I believe that's Lucy's book, or is it Anne's?
Yes, I
Well,
think it's Lucy's.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now Lucy had, cancer, and so when she was a child, she had to have complete reconstructive surgery, so
Ah, I read it. Yes.
she was missing a lot of her face, and And yet she had
Mm.
this spunky personality, so everybody loved her. Unfortunately, she dealt with low self-esteem, which I related with her so much.
Oh my God,
So she
yes.
ended up becoming a drug addict, but her story's so beautiful about just this spirit that she had, and so Ann Patchett wrote her version of Lucy's
Yes,
life as she saw it, and these 2 books mean so much to me because I
yes,
related, even though you might look at me and say, "Well, you didn't have, like, a missing jaw," I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the extent of your injury.
that's right.
It's the way that you perceive yourself, the way others perceive you, and as we were just talking about, in our well, I don't know, I think in our world, we are visual people if we have sight, and we are judged, but then we end up judging ourselves. And at the end of the day, as you said, it's about connection. It's
Yeah,
not about our exterior, although I am still, because of my experience, I am very concerned with my physical appearance because I feel safer and more comfortable when I look my best because I remember what it was like to feel ugly. And so
yes,
people put so much emphasis on our exterior. And I love your message of, even though you went through all of this stuff, that's I mean, the pain, the physical challenges, the way that people perceived you. At the end of the day, you're just as worthy of love as anybody else, but not even that. You can still, there's no barrier to love. It
yeah.
doesn't, there's no barrier to love, and I love that that's one of your big messages, and I'd love to hear about tell me what you're gonna say, but I wanna hear a lot
Oh, it's
about
I
your
got
book.
I
Yeah.
got this really interesting thing to say.
Yeah.
My children, and then also my next door neighbor's child, I knew them when they were very young, and I noticed my son was the first one. When he reached 2.5, suddenly he said, "Mama, what happened to you?" He could see something opens up in their psyche where they could. This is what I say where prejudice comes from, when they can discern that you're different. You're not, I don't know if you studied child development, but
Yeah,
they
I
think
have.
they're one and the same with their mother. They don't, like my granddaughter now, she, whatever ever her mother feels, she feels as well. She's connected so deeply to her mother. But at 2.5, and then my daughter reached 2.5, same thing. What happened to you? Suddenly her eyes opened to, I was different. And it was so beautiful. And then the neighbor child, I'm over there at the backyard, and she suddenly says to me, "What happened to you?" And her parents are like, "Oh, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it." I'm like, "Oh, no, no, no. I want her. This is perfect because this is exactly what my two children both experienced." I think that's so amazing. It's like those beautiful little souls coming to life. And but this is where we all get tainted, in socializing because we see things different, and suddenly I mean, that's where bigotry starts and
Mhm.
prejudice starts. And I think that's fascinating to see how that little, but before that, no, they didn't,
Yeah, they see
you
you.
know,
When I had my surgery, my best friend, we were 7. I had 2 surgeries, so I think the first one I was 7 and the second one I might have been 8. But my
yeah.
friend, I had the surgery, so now instead of a
So
birthmark,
you
I
had
had a
plastic surgery? Yeah.
yeah, so I had a big
Oh,
ropey scar that was very pink
oh
right here
yeah. Yeah.
instead of a birthmark, and my friend said, what happened?" And I said, "I had
Wow.
my birthmark removed." She said, "What birthmark?" We were
Yeah.
little kids, we were best friends. She did not
Oh
even
yeah.
see. She just saw, because
That was you.
yeah, kids don't see that. I mean, some do, because obviously that's why a lot of kids would point and stare at my face and say, "You're a duty face, you're ugly, and what happened to you, and why does your face look like that?" But I would love to hear too, as we're going on, kind of, because the focus of the Still Standing podcast is really, like, not just overcoming adversity, but turning it into something positive. And I think that you're speaking to other people about your experience, you're writing the book, you're
Yes. Yes.
teaching about electrical safety, so that if
Yeah.
kids are going to, go into this profession, great, just be aware of the dangers of it. Um, and
Well,
so,
because
yeah.
they're going to be drivers too. The eighth graders will be drivers in 2 years. So we thought this science teacher and I both agreed, yeah, this is good teaching for them to understand. You could be in this situation as a driver on the car. So That's why.
Yeah. And
So
with all of what's
yeah.
happened to you, um, would you, if you had the chance to take it back, would you? For it to have never happened?
No, it's that's what
Yeah.
I have thought for a long time. I wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
My life was completely different. So yeah, I spoke in front of a large group of adults, and I was in some kind of est training group, and I said that out loud, and one woman said, "Oh, I don't believe you. I can't believe that you would." I said, "No. If I made a list of all the bad things that happened as a result, and all the good things, oh, the good things far outweigh the bad things. Oh yeah.
That's
Oh,
so beautiful.
because it's soul satisfying. It's. I mean, all these things I realized over the years, but like I
Yeah.
said, connecting with this man solidified that experience of, yeah, this is the reason I came into this life, because it was so satisfying, like immensely. Yeah.
And also you mentioned in your other interview that, your father was a bully. He didn't
Yes.
show emotion. He was a, a brash kind of a guy, and very stern. And I don't remember all the details. I want to say, I don't know if
A
abusive is too
Marine.
strong. Yeah, but was he abusive or was it just more his? I can't remember exactly. I don't want to accuse him
I
of
mean, there
that.
was abuse. Yeah, I have a
Yeah,
brother who's still dealing with
yeah.
the memories of his father. He said at one point he was thinking, maybe I'm not even going to survive this abuse. Yeah, my father seemed to be more abusive towards his sons, and the son that died. I wondered if there's a connection there, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, what you had said is that when you were in the hospital, it was the first time where you saw him show emotion, and I think you said he cried,
Oh yeah,
seeing you
yeah,
like that, which
yeah.
I don't want to say that's a positive thing or
No,
a negative
it was a
thing, but
good thing for him.
it's a
Yeah,
good thing for exactly. I mean, it's him being able to access those emotions because I would imagine that he suffered abuse or some kind of trauma that made him the way that he was. And then he learned to shut that emotion down. And then, of course, being in the military, you can't be soft and be,
yeah,
trained to do what they have to do. And so I would imagine that his having to shut his feelings down also created a lot of rage within him. And the way you described
yeah.
it is that it was like this, it was very, and you can just, I would, if you can describe it in your own words, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Right. I see it as beginning with, especially when my brother at not for 9 months. So from the age of 4, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and for 9 months, he slowly deteriorated and died. And my father never really dealt with that as we do now. We process, through therapy and all that. That stuff wasn't available in the 60s. And I think that's the reason he was so
Oh, yeah.
raging,
Makes total sense.
because
Yeah.
he gives, yeah,
And that's
yeah.
his
And
big
so,
trauma.
yeah, he raised us to not express because he didn't want to go there. So, yeah.
Yeah. And
And that brought me to a place of, I have to express, and literally I exploded from the inside out. So through the electricity. And my father was an electrical engineer, which I find that kind of fascinating too.
I do too. Uh, and just what is it that you want people to know? I mean, I know that's a very broad question, but I ask it for most of my guests. Anything that comes to mind that that you've learned that you would love to share with other people?
Things, well, I was thinking about your title of your podcast, Magic, and then I looked up magic, and it's like got a weird definition, but to me, magic is things aren't always as they appear, as they seem. And I would say that that's what I learned, that I would share with people, people that are suicidal or depressed or whatever you want to, in a place of conflict within themselves or outside themselves. So as a teenager, I was worried that, I wouldn't be able to do whatever, but waking up in the hospital, you realize nobody knows what they're doing. And that's freeing because it allowed me to not have to live by others' expectations. I mean, if I would follow my mother's ideas, I would think I'd never going to have a boyfriend. But as soon as I came out of the hospital, I had totally loved myself. I totally accepted who I was. And what do you know? Here comes this guy who says, I've always watched you before and I don't care that you're injured,
Mhm.
and defied everybody's expectations from then on. Not trying to be what my mother would expect, a young woman, it just blew everybody's mind. And it was fun to witness all that, I have to
Question
say.
is when you said, "After this happened, I learned to love myself." How did you do that?
I think from being in the hospital, for one thing, everybody, the caregivers, I should say. My sister was reminding me, don't call them caretakers, caregivers. Um, they had nothing but praise for not the outside of my body, but how my whole body was healing. It wasn't about, oh, how you look. So that fortified me just to love me because it was profound. I had to witness, when they take the bandages off, I witnessed my body uncovered and I could only feel like, well, I have to protect this body that's so, I want to stay alive. I want to be alive. And so I had this motherly instinct towards myself.
That's yeah, that
And
makes sense. And it's also not about what your body looks like, it's about what your body can do, how your body can heal, the
yeah.
miracle of that. That's so amazing that you were able to find that within yourself, even though you may not have had the parental nurturing to sort of teach you that.
And because of my mother, actually, when I got out of the hospital, I was in the bathtub and she needed to help me because I was very weak. And she saw me naked and ran out of the bathroom crying, saying, "You used to be so beautiful." And
Oh, yeah.
I had this real sense of, whoa, that's her issue, not my issue, because I really had learned to appreciate this body that was healing and strong, eventually would become strong. And I had nothing but love for my body. And so I really accepted. I mean, she even said, I was surprised you didn't cry at night, in your sleep. Or so. I said, because I was at peace. It was, yeah, it was unreal. I
I
don't,
understand that. I think sometimes when we're forced to let go of a part of ourselves, and there's that surrender that comes with it, it's freeing because, as I said,
yeah, yeah.
this story I really battled with. Do I put this on this podcast or this podcast? But I think there's sort of both. And I'm
Yeah,
going,
yeah, I think
it
so.
is because there's a spiritual aspect to that, but there's
Mm,
also a self love and healing aspect to that of really understanding that, like, when we surrender to our circumstances, and it doesn't mean you won't feel grief. I'm not saying don't you're not allowed you're allowed to be
sure,
angry, you're allowed to cry, you're
sure.
allowed to feel angry, you're allowed to grieve the person that you were before. But in that, there's this beautiful letting go of, okay, I have no choice but to let go of that person because there's no getting it back. So I can sit here and dwell on what I don't have, or I can focus on the beauty, which is I'm still the same soul, I'm still the same person. And if I can put myself out into the world and show love and be love, there's nothing you can't do. So you
Yeah,
might have to
yeah,
get a prosthetic, or you might have to you're going to have to change the way that you move or the way that you get in and out of a car or anything. But I love that. I really appreciate your message about as much emphasis as we put on the physical appearance, especially of women, but in this culture especially, it is so beautiful to be able to find that. And there is also a documentary that I assume you've probably watched that I'm going to recommend to everyone, which is called
mm,
Happy. And it was on Netflix last I checked, but it's about people that have had, like, been through horrible circumstances, and then they compare them to people in the West who are, they've lived pretty normal lives, and they said, all these people in the West, they're on Prozac, they're depressed, they have all this money,
ah,
but the
ah,
people who have less, or the woman who attempted to take her life and ended up disfiguring herself but survived. I think it was her.
mm,
I might have had this wrong.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it was a long time ago, but she said, I've never been happier because now I don't have a face, but I learned to love myself. And
Wow.
she sees the joy, and you are forced to see the beauty in all things, because otherwise it would, if all you cared about was the way you looked, then when you have that taken away, it's, well, now I have to look at the beauty around me and in my connections. And I think that's such a beautiful message.
Yes.
And they showed people who are just in poverty, and they're the happiest people in the world, some of them, because they don't compare themselves to anybody else. And they interviewed a man who had nothing but a bowl of rice for dinner and a tin roof that was leaking. And he was just so happy for the roof over his head and for that bowl of
Yes.
rice because he doesn't have a million things. So he's not left wanting more. He's just so
Yes.
grateful for that one meal of the day. And I think there's such a beautiful lesson in that. And I think you've sort of you've demonstrated that kind of
And
surrendering and then thriving.
I traveled to India in 1995 with a group of people. Um, and this man on the street came up to me. He saw my scars, my skin grafts, and was showing me this book. He couldn't really speak English, but he shows me this book that says, "Hey, do you want to heal your skin condition? Buy this snake oil," basically, is what it was. And I started to laugh. Ah. And his friend next to him has said, "No, that's not a skin condition. That's plastic surgery." And I realized where these people come from, they didn't have the medical system that would save somebody in my situation. If I lived in India with that electrocution, I wouldn't have survived.
Yeah.
And I felt a sense of real gratitude, like, oh, wow. And also, I have to say one more thing. We were right there where there's Tibetan, the Dalai Lama exiled from Tibet and came over to India, and he has this town where all these Tibetans they've emigrated to, and people in my group, these were Western people that were saying, "Wow, how can these people smile?" And I said, "I know how they can smile because they're grateful to
Yeah.
be here." I
Yes.
totally understood, but nobody else understood. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Because these people lived, like you said, these lives of normality, I guess I'd call it, because
Yeah.
I get it why they're smiling. They're happy as can
Yes.
be. Yes.
Because
Like you just
without
said.
without the dark, there's no light. And also, without your
Yes.
experience, you wouldn't realize how lucky you are
There
that,
you are.
yeah, I think that's so beautiful too, that once we've had something really difficult happen and we've survived it, it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh my God, like,
Nothing scares me now.
yeah,
Almost nothing. Some
right.
things, but
I
yeah.
know. There are some things, but at the same time, you look back and say, I mean, you might not have even been here at all. So you can look at every day as a miracle and you can look at,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, maybe you have some scars, but and you're missing a lower leg and you're missing some toes, but at the end of the day you're here to experience it all and to connect with other people and to just experience this world. So I really thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing your story so vulnerably and for your honesty and just sharing such a beautiful message with people. I know that it will really bring hope and inspiration to other people who've been through some tough stuff and maybe people who don't feel like they have had the worst thing happen to them. But it really is just it's a reminder that be grateful as much as you can. It doesn't mean you won't feel pain, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there's still beauty here. Yeah, I
Yeah. Anyway.
appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
Ann
Shannon.
Claire Kronlage. You
Yeah.
have a book that is called
More than
More Than
skin
Skin
deep.
Deep,
Yeah.
and it's
As I
available on
always
Amazon.
on
So
Amazon.
I'll put a link
As an
below.
ebook or a paperback or a hard copy or hard book. Yeah, you know what I mean? Hardback,
Yeah.
whatever. What do they
Well,
call it?
thank you so much for
Hardcover.
being here. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Shannon.